Je suis Grégory Pouy et je vous présente Vlan, un podcast pour vous aider à être plus serein en comprenant, avec nuance, la complexité du monde et en inventant activement le monde à venir. Encore un épisode en anglais, je vous préviens. Tout simplement parce que parfois, souvent, les Américains sont en avance sur les sujets et il n'y a pas l'équivalent en français. Et aujourd'hui, j'ai l'immense plaisir de recevoir Priya Parker, qui est américaine, qui est l'une des coachs les plus en vue de New York, qui est facilitatrice, en particulier de conflits, qui anime un podcast pour le New York Times, et qui a écrit un livre sur l'art de se rassembler. Alors, ça peut sembler être un sujet qui peut distant, étonnant, mais pourtant, en réalité, et je vais passer en anglais, je suis désolé, in a world that is increasingly optimized and automated, I think we have forgotten somehow how we truly come together. And that's exactly the discussion we're going to have with Priya. What does it mean to come together? What makes a great celebration? What makes a great meetings? And we've all been through those conferences, but also classes where we were bored as hell. And Priya, in a brilliant book, explained how you can actually make that happen. Why do you get married? How do you get married the best way? How this celebration becomes something that everybody is going to remember about. So I'll let you with this episode. Allez, Vlan, c'est parti. Hi, everyone. Hi, Priya. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
I'm so happy to have you because I think that especially through AI, gathering is more and more important because we don't meet so much and intimacy is actually challenged. But the first question I was wondering is, why did you felt it was so important that you wanted to write a book about the heart of gathering?
I am a conflict resolution facilitator, and I realized as I would go to dinner after dinner after dinner, or birthday party, or product launch, or back to school night, that so many of the gatherings that I was at were just on autopilot, and everyone was there, but bored. And whether it's, texting under the table or kind of looking, or even with companies or brands, people there to literally take a photo, maybe for Instagram at best, and then, head out, back to school nights or being at school events where all of these parents will, are there, but there's nothing to actually connect them. So everyone awkwardly sort of sticks to themselves if they're new. And I realized that all of the ingredients for a beautiful evening are in the room, but we're not taught how to activate them. And as a facilitator, my profession is about how to help groups connect. And I realized that in so much of popular culture, any guidance we have around hosting, if you go to a library or a bookstore and you go to the hosting section, you find a lot of cookbooks.
True.
Right? Which I love food, but it's not the only form. It basically, we have this proxy that to host is to cook, and to cook is to host.
That's true.
And so much about group life is there's an entire world about how do you actually help people meaningfully connect. And and I wanted to write a book that was about everything else outside and around the food that you can shape.
So what would be the basic first advice to gather with purpose, or to actually make it better? Just the basic foundation of making it better.
So the biggest mistake we make when we gather is we actually skip defining the purpose. We skip asking, why are we doing this? Why are we getting married? Well, you should definitely ask that before you have a wedding.
One you should.
But why are we having a wedding, right? Is it to honor the previous generation, as it is in so many cultures? Or is it to bring together two communities, two tribes? And so that in the long run, when the going gets tough, as it does in all long-term relationships, someone at your wedding knocks you on the shoulder and says, work this out. I was at your wedding. Remember the communal vow I took. Remember that day. And those are two different visions for weddings. And neither is right or wrong, but there are fundamentally different purposes, which then should look like different weddings. But because we don't pause to ask, what is the purpose of our wedding? Why are we doing this? We could go to City Hall to get married, right? You can sign a piece of paper. Why are we bringing this together? And particularly in modern life, when we wed people who might pray to a different God or eat different food or cheer for a different football team, right? Most people inherently, most families, most communities today have more difference within than in almost any other time in human history. And yet, in part, trying to not offend one another, we throw out so many of our rituals, but we're not replacing them with meaningful rituals. And so the art of modern gathering is to start with a shared need and to bring people along, almost as if you're telling them a story so that they understand how they can be successful there. I'll give a simple example. We started with food. When I wrote The Art of Gathering, it came out in 2018. And in the US, and I'm so happy finally for it to be in France. It's a real honor for me. And when a journalist called me up and she said, I've been assigned to write a story about how to host a dinner party based on Art of Gathering principles. And so again, food, right? And I said, what do you think that means? And she said, I don't know. Are you going to tell me where to put the fish knife? Are you going to tell me where to put the, glass of wine? I said, no, absolutely not. In fact, I'm going to ask you a question. And for your listeners, this is the question I would most take away from our conversation. I'm going to ask you a question around which you should design your dinner. And I asked her, what is a need in your life that by bringing together a specific group of people, they might be able to address? And she thought, and she said, I don't know if this counts, but the thing that's coming up is I'm a journalist, but I'm also a worn out mom. And the other day, a friend invited me over and she cut me up a peanut butter jelly sandwich. This is a very uniquely American story.
Very much so.
A PBJ. She cut me a sandwich into triangles and fed me baby carrot sticks, and I burst into tears. And I said, why did you burst into tears? And she said, because it's been a long time since I've been taken care of. And she said, what if I hosted a dinner party for my other worn out moms? And I said, great, give it a name. And she called it the Worn Out Moms Hootenanny. And Hootenanny is sort of a gathering from sort of music and folk traditions where everyone brings an instrument. And I said, give it a rule, right? If a gathering is a social contract, how do people behave at this thing? And she said, she thought for a moment, she said, if you talk about your children, you have to take a tequila shot.
I love that one.
And all of a sudden, color was coming back on her face. It moved from this sense of obligation, this dinner party where she has to go through the motions and everything is focused on the perfection of the stuff.
Right.
Rather than to begin with a real need and meaning and storytelling. And the last thing I'll say is, so if the first step to gathering more meaningfully is to stop and first ask, why are we doing this? To what end? What is our desired outcome? The second step, or a second step, is that the gathering does not begin when people enter the room. The gathering begins from the moment of discovery in the guest's mind. You are hosting them from the moment you're telling them about this, basically from the invitation. So if she had just said, come to my house for dinner, and then they enter and she says, you can't talk about your kids unless you take, you can't talk about your kids. And if you do, you have to take a tequila shot. People might say, who are you to tell me what to do? Right? So I said, start with the invitation. This is a real story. She did this. She sent an email. In the subject line, it said, worn out mom's hootenanny. And then I said, tell the peanut butter and jelly sandwich story. Right? And she did. All 6 women RSVP'd within the first 45 minutes. Yes. And they were there for it. And she moved from a format, right, which is a staid format where we expect a certain thing. And she paused and said, not starting with form, but starting with function. Why? What is a need in my life? It allowed her to decide who to invite that evening. It then could allow her what to cook. She could carry out, right? It just expands all of your choices. And so much of modern life, you can go to a gathering, it can be completely not meaningful, or it can be perpetuating or continuing old forms that no longer serve, or we don't even understand what they mean. And so we just think, oh, this is just so boring. But it can actually be so thrilling when you realize that you can design these in a way that actually creates transformative, meaningful connection in the room.
But to come back to an example that you talk about in the book, talking about baby shower. Why do you gather? I mean, what you're saying is making me think of, well, this is your job, the heart of listening and disagreeing. And there is this thing about, usually when you disagree, it's about solution. But when you come back to the need, that's where need cannot contradict each other. The solution can, but the need cannot. And you should come from solution to the need. And what you're saying is you have to come from how to why. But for example, when you do like a baby shower, I mean, the objective is basically celebrating the baby that is coming up. So that's what people will think. Oh, getting married. Oh, well, we are celebrating love.
But if it's celebrating the baby, why is it only traditionally women there? Right? In modern life, in a heterosexual couple, if fathers are fathering and they need as much wisdom, right? If it's to celebrate the baby versus to support the mother in labor, right? I'm making a fine distinction, right? And so a huge part of modern life, and this is why people are often like, you're a conflict resolution facilitator, but you're interested in gatherings. Gatherings are small p political. Right? Show me how you gather and I will tell you what your values are.
Oh, wow.
And so even as you think about, in modern life, so many couples today, young people today, if they're having a child, if they're having children, they want to parent in ways that they weren't parented. They want to father in ways that they weren't fathered. And so in part, when we actually think about the infrastructure, our everyday rituals, knowledge transfer happens in these gatherings, right? You go around and you give advice. If you're expecting a father to hold a baby or to wrap a diaper, right? Or to normalize that this is not women's talk, right? I'm saying this in quotes. Then we need to also reimagine our rituals. I'll give a simple example. Friends of mine years ago, and every example I share, I have permission to share. They got married and the woman got pregnant and they were having their first child. And they were part of this ilk that realized they didn't want to necessarily replicate the forms of, they wanted to co-parent equally.
Right.
And so they paused and they really thought, what is the need? Why do people have baby showers? What is this thing? Right? I don't want to pin the diaper on the baby or, there are all these sort of fun games. I really want to think through what is this thing and what is our deepest need? And so they each paused and they said, okay, so for the woman, she said, I'm terrified of labor. Yeah. And I would like some support and I'm feeling really scared. I would like a women's something to just help me prepare. And then both of them thought about it and they said, we want to be surrounded by a community that normalizes both of us parenting. So they did two things. One, they hosted, she asked a friend of hers to host a women's circle in which that was just for women, and every woman there had given birth before, right? When you have a purpose, it also helps you understand who to invite, who is in and who is out and who serves it. And they did a small ritual in which they each brought a bead. And I'll give the example just because I think it allows people to have imagination in their own worlds. That everyone brought there was a beads that they tied into a necklace, and everyone was invited to bring a quality that they knew their friend to already hold. Nice. That would serve her as she became a mother.
Nice.
And they told a story from her life in that circle to remind her of that. They then tied that value, the bead, into a necklace, and she took it with her to the hospital in the birthing room. And then they also hosted a different night, or that evening, a dinner with men and women. And they went around and invited everyone to share what is one way you have been parented that you want to continue in your life, and what is one way you were parented that will stop with this generation.
Super thoughtful.
super thoughtful. And then they had a big dance party because they believed that life doesn't have to end when you have children.
True. I believe that too.
Me too.
What you're explaining is it's supposed to know yourself very well also. I mean, not just, it's supposed to work on the gathering, but it's also supposed to know what your needs are.
It's an invitation to wake up.
Yeah, because we don't know so well our needs. I mean, not all of us.
It's very astute. It's actually, in a way, it's a lot easier to inherit certain formats because you are on autopilot. And often people don't think to gather in new ways until the ways they're gathering becomes really, really bad. And it's usually in a big fight, right? A Thanksgiving in the US, whether it's Thanksgiving dinner or in a big family reunion, or for perhaps Jewish families like Passover Seder, you do it the same way, right? Every year for 40 years, and one year it finally explodes. And the three women who have been cooking for 40 years say, enough, this model no longer works, right? And so often we're forced to think about what the need is, often through conflict, often through someone getting so upset saying, this is no longer working. The way we're doing Christmas or the way we're gathering as a family is no longer working, or the patriarch dies, right? Or the house is no longer, or they move out of the home. Like there's usually some kind of crisis that forces these questions. Or someone experiences another way of doing something and they realize how much they've been missing. But it does begin with intention, which is, what is a need in my life, or what is a need in this community, is a simple question, and it's a profound question, and it's a political question, and it's an invitation. The gathering is almost like, it's like a play. The play at the very end is the performance. But to get to that performance, it's a lot of rehearsal. It's a lot of script writing. It's actually asking, what is the purpose? What are these characters? What is the protagonist trying to say? And similarly, gathering, I think of it as an art form. And you can make it super simple. You can have a much better meeting. It doesn't have to be rocket science, but it does begin with intention.
Yeah, because when you have, I mean, just by the fact of thinking of that intention, it pretty much changed everything. I mean, it changed the entire dynamic.
Say more. I agree with you. Say more.
So no, but what I feel is that most of the time we just don't do it. So we let's do I mean, if I take my example, I love having dinner party because I love cooking. French people, I guess.
The French are great gatherers.
Well, not French. Not every French love cooking. That is to be fair. But I do, family things. But usually, and I kind of struggle with who I'm inviting. Usually I'm inviting the usual suspects plus a few people, but I never really think about what is the intention of the dinner. And I think that, and I know we discussed that just before talking, but Esther love, gathering, as you probably know, Esther Perel, and she always create a little game at the dinner. And I think that's exactly what to my understanding, that's exactly what she's doing, like having a purpose and making sure that people connect more than just being there.
Yes. And she's a wonderful gatherer. And, I'll give an example. She, I actually was at her Passover Seder years ago, and and when you're gathering, so the first is purpose, the second is invitation. These are all kind of ways to begin to help you make the right decisions to get the right people in the room. But then once you're actually in the room as a host, you have the role to connect your guests, right? Particularly when they don't know each other. It sounds like with your, regular gatherings, all the usual suspects, you don't need to introduce two best friends to each other, right?
In that situation,
but part of expanding and saying, you know what, it's time for this group to have some fresh blood. Everyone brings someone that no one else knows, right? Whatever it is. But then part of the infrastructure, the example that you're giving from Esther Perel, the part of the infrastructure is a good host really thinks about how to connect their guests in ways that are relevant, that are culturally relevant, that don't seem super awkward, that are very generous. And you can do it in a couple of ways. One is the way you open, the story you're telling that you're opening. At this Passover Seder I went to, it's 30, maybe a minute and a half. Everyone's milling around. Some people have been there for many, 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 many decades. Some people are brand new, some people are Jewish, some people are not. And she stands up and dings the bell and says, welcome to this evening. Welcome. Some of you have been with us for the last 25 years and haven't missed a night. And others of you, this is your first Seder. You're not even Jewish, right? And you're sort of laughing. And she's welcoming. And then we are so happy you are here. In fact, you renew us, right? Who's the furthest out? Who's the closest in? And then as a personal note, this is the first Seder, this is years ago, without my mother.
Oh.
And I'm so happy to be in community here with you.
Nice.
Right? 45 seconds, and she's completely, as a great host does, changes the meaning of the night. And so any of us, whether you're doing a film, like a film launch, right? Versus like, okay, everyone's in the room. I've been to these. You come to the room, everyone's excited. They're excited to celebrate the director or, some indie film. Their friend has been working on it forever. You get there. And in part, and I don't, maybe not in France so much, but at least in the US, there's this sort of culture of thinking, oh, don't make a big deal or don't impose or the film speaks for itself. No. Honor, welcome, tell the story. Right? In the back, do you remember, the intern when you came and you lost the film roll and you ran across town, and they start laughing and everyone looks for a moment at the intern, and then the director forgot his script and then she remembered it, and then, right? There's ways, who's in this room? Why are we here? And you're actually you're creating a web, and you're allowing them to have permission to then look at each other, connect with each other, know why they're there, share a common context so that they can have a beautiful evening together.
And actually, you mentioned the movie night, the movie launch. And actually, at the beginning of the book, you also talk about the Red Hook Tribunal. And I was super interested because I was like, oh, this is not just for, casual gathering or wedding. It can be like for larger purpose. Can you take this example and explain why you took it and what they did at Red Hook?
So the Red Hook Community Justice Initiative was an initiative that was started in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, called Red Hook, in which a number of judges realized that the way in which their courts were organized and the limitation of what they could actually issue for different crimes was basically jail time. And they were seeing the same people coming through over and over again and saying, what is the purpose of this empty ritual? It's not reducing crime rates. And so they paused and they asked a radical question, which is, what is the purpose of court?
Punish. That's what people will say.
Right. Is it to punish? Right. And what is the purpose of a judge? Is it to just know the legal code and make sure that they're applying and using their discretion to put the right punishment on the right crime? And they said, what if it was, and they brought together lawyers and social workers and judges. And they said, what if the purpose, let us actually ask, what if the purpose of a court proceeding was to help reduce crime in a neighborhood? And so they radically reimagined the court proceeding. They took over a former girls' parochial school filled with light and long windows. They lowered the judge's bench. So if you enter there today, they're still going. The bench is almost like a wooden table, maybe 2 inches elevated. It's not this big, imposing, kind of altar. Judge Calabrese it's often the same judge, so that they build relationships over time. Before the person enters, they have time with the social worker. The expansion of what the judge can do and offer, jail time is one of them, but they can offer community service. They can do circles where they do restorative justice, and they say what this actually needs is this person needs to come back into the community. And recidivism rates have dropped in teenagers hugely, and in adults 13%, which is sort of unheard of. And they've been going for 20 years. But what they did was they asked this radical question, which is, what is the purpose of the court proceeding? I have another example in that first chapter that I find so helpful, because it's from the New York Times, this storied institution over 100 years old. And they had this meeting that they, for 50 years, called the Page One meeting. And the page one meeting was, it was this very important meeting and a very symbolic meeting when rookie journalists would come for the first time. They get to go see this meeting. It was held on a very specific floor around what they called the King Arthur-like table. It was a round table, and the editors would come and offer their stories to the Olympian gods, as it was said to me. And they were fighting. The purpose of the meeting was to fight over what 7 stories got to be on the front of the New York Times. And in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the 7 stories that were on the front of the New York Times basically became the news of the world, right? If the president is going to read one story, if all of the financial institutions are going to read one page, it's a serious form of power. 15 years ago, the new former but now executive editor, Dean Baquet, realized that there's this thing called the internet. And the majority of the readers were getting their stories not from the newspaper, but from the homepage. And then 5 years later, the majority of the readers weren't even getting their stories from the New York Times website. They were getting their stories from this thing called social media. But they still had this old meeting. And so he reimagined the meeting. He changed the time of it. He expanded it from 8 people to 30. They invited the audio team, which at the time was hugely controversial. And he basically said, this is the wrong meeting. This is the wrong meeting for our organization. We're actually stuck in this form. Our mental models are stuck, and our meetings are a reflection of that stuckness.
You were talking earlier on about rituals, and I tend to believe that rituals have somehow disappeared. I mean, most of them. What is becoming an adult, for example? What is a ritual there? And I feel that as humans, we need rituals. And I was wondering how gathering is a heavy or important part of this gathering, of these rituals.
I deeply agree with you. Human beings need rituals to make meaning of their lives. And traditional communities are wonderful sources of inherited rituals, right? If you go, the art of gathering, I wrote this, I'm biracial, I'm bicultural. I was born in Zimbabwe. My parents are divorced. They each remarried. I went back and forth between these 2 households for 10 years. I'm half Indian, half white American. In one household, my mother is, I'd spend every 2 weeks with this household. There's English, Indian, Buddhist, atheist, sometimes agnostic, vegetarian, progressive, globally minded household. And then the other household was this white American, evangelical, Christian, conservative, basketball playing household. And very different. And I know that in traditional communities, whether they're Jewish, whether you go to southern India and you go to a red thread tying ceremony and you go to the village and the 12-year-old boy gets a red thread tied on his wrist, everyone bursts into tears. Why? Because they understand the symbolism of the red thread, because they've been doing it for generations, right? If you go to Java, if you go to Indonesia and you go to a Balinese tooth filing ceremony, right? You go to the village and the tooth is filed off the child, a very specific tooth. Everyone bursts into tears. Why? Because they understand the symbolism of the tooth. And they are there and they're witnessing it together. And their tooth was filed, 40 years ago, and their great-grandmother's tooth was filed. And as we've diversified, and as we marry people unlike us, and as we move to cities, we've lost those rituals. We've thrown them out, in part because we are with people unlike us and who haven't been born on the same plot of earth or pray to the same God. But we still need ritual. And so part of modern life is to actually ask, first, what are the transition rituals now that exist? And second, how do we mark them with people unlike us? I'll give a simple example. A friend of mine, she's half German, half Egyptian. She moved to New York maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And her Egyptian father died at the end of his life. He was, in his late 80s. Her father died in a small village in Germany. She flies home to go to the funeral. She supports her mother. She comes back. She calls me up. And I'm like, how are you? And she said, I'm really happy. Obviously, I saw a lot of my childhood friends. I was there for my mother, but I feel kind of strange. I said, what do you mean? Tell me more. And she said, well, this is a huge loss for me, but none of my friends or my current life was there. And of course they don't know him. They didn't fly there. It's expensive, but I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what if we host a gathering? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, what is it that you tell me about what you're longing for? And she said, he was such a huge part of me and none of you know him. And I'm grieving and I don't even know. And we just sort of sorted through it. So I said, so we created a ritual. So she invited 40 friends. She invited them to wear black or navy blue or dark color. She told the story, right? Oh, we also don't even have the language for it. She just said she explained it in an email. I'm not even really sure what I'm doing, but we're going to do this together. You are important to me. I'm going through a difficult time. If you would be willing to come, please come. We'll gather in my apartment from 6 to 9. We'll have a little program, quote unquote, from 6:30 to 8. And then in my tradition, in the Egyptian tradition, we will iftar, we will break bread. And we all gathered and she sat in a chair and she showed us photos of him and she told stories about him. And we laughed because we started realizing, oh, she's not her. She's her father's daughter, right? And we began to understand and widen our own context of who she was. And we were so moved to be brought in, and people themselves were crying in part because, and so she spoke, and then she ended her portion with the ghazal that he would play every morning in the shower to wake up to. And then as modern people from all sorts of different places, almost that was the call. And then there's this sort of improvisational response where different people shared what they heard with her, shared their own losses, thanked her for this ritual, and realized how much they hadn't grieved the loss as immigrants themselves, right? In the diaspora, whether it's from Nigeria or Mexico or Ghana, and how meaningful and beautiful it was. And in the beginning, her thought was, isn't this selfish? And I said, no, it is so deeply generous. It is so deeply generous to be asked to be part of something meaningful. You are a vessel also for us. And part of what we created, and my invitation to anyone listening, is to pause. It goes back to the beginning of our conversation, is just ask this simple and audacious question, which is, what is the need here? And can we figure it out together? And then can we come together in a way with the shared structure so people know how to behave and interact without assuming that there's a supremacy here or this is always how we gather, but this is how we're going to gather in this moment. Are you in?
Actually, it made me think of Simon Sinek talking about friendship. And because you said they gathered in real life, and you mentioned that in the book, the difference between connection and proximity. But we tend to, sometimes not even call our friends. We just text them on WhatsApp or whatever app. And we tend to think that, yeah, I'm present, but are you? And there is a huge difference between connection and proximity. And I would love to hear what you have to say on this also.
I mean, first, you can be in the same room as people and feel very alone. Right. So part of the art of gathering and a huge part of the book is about in-person gatherings. So the principles also apply to virtual. So how many rooms we've all sat in where you're so close, but it's not connecting, right? You can have communities or gatherings where you feel really alone. So the first is really thinking about how to have good in-person experiences. And one of the first things is put your phone away. Put your phone away. You have the most interesting thing in the world in your pocket. Put it away. I met a business leader recently who said he started hosting a weeknight kind of gathering for people in his neighborhood, colleagues, and there were 3 rules. They would gather at a bar, and there are 3 rules. One is you can't talk about work. The second is you have to meet someone new. And the third is, and I thought this was so interesting, you can't look anything up on your phone. And it was the third piece that actually totally shifted the dynamic. And part of the brilliance was he didn't just say no phones. He realized that sometimes people pull up their phones to look something up in conversation. If you have a question, go ask the bartender, right? And so phones can be very distracting. But the other piece is we tend to think we are connecting because we have all of this easy access to technology. when actually these are very, it's like a diet. These are very superficial ways of connecting. So even simply, if you think about maintaining long distance friendships, the difference between a quick text versus a 1-minute voice memo. Like one of my best friends lives in Europe. And one of the ways we've started experimenting, really maintaining the same quality of connection, is through these we joke that we have a 2-person podcast. We send each other voice memos that are often 20 minutes, and they're like little delights. It's a different way of interacting because you can't respond right away. But they're all, again, with the intention. What quality of connection am I doing? And you can't do this with everybody, but how do you actually think about the conversations and the time spent that is high quality? And particularly for young people and teenagers who don't even have a folk memory of what it was like before phones or before social media. And so really designing in-person experiences for them, in-person play dates, in-person hangs that are getting them off videos, social media, and phones.
Do you think that in a time of AI and hyper efficiency, we try to optimize everything, and New York is pretty much the most efficient city somehow, is gathering an act of resistance?
Absolutely. It's a massive act of resistance. I mean, the first page of The Art of Gathering, and I wrote this, and it came out in 2018. I started researching in 2012. And the first page says something like, there's a reason why when countries start descending into authoritarianism, one of the first rights governments take away is the right to assemble.
100%.
Because they understand what can happen when people come together to dream and talk and complain and wonder and share stories. And similarly, whether the threat is an authoritarian government or whether the threat, quote unquote, is AI or machines or efficiency or productivity, right? And the cult of anything. Gathering, putting our phones away, spending time, right? You cook, spending time telling stories, laughing, coming together, playing games, allowing oneself to be rather than do is absolutely an act of resistance. It's also deeply, deeply human. And as AI continues to penetrate all parts of our lives, one of the, who knows what it's going to be able to do, but the connection we are able to create, and the reciprocity between humans is one of the things to really deeply, deeply, deeply defend. I'm a conflict resolution facilitator. One of the books that has most impacted me through my lineage is Martin Buber, and he was a Christian theologian, and he had this concept that the relationship between two people is, the language he used was I and thou, and that dialogue restores the relationship. Sometimes things get off between two people, and whether it's in a marriage, whether it's within friendships, whether it's within a company, where you move from an I and thou relationship, meaning we both have dignity, we are both present to each other, to an I-it relationship where you become a transaction to me. And dialogue restores the I thou. And part of being in person, part of choosing to gather, part of experimenting in these different ways is restoring the I-thou relationship between humans.
I love that. And I was also wondering, because I've heard Trevor Noah talking about liming, which is a concept that they do in South Africa, where they join together.
Also the Caribbean.
Yeah,
yes.
Doing just nothing.
Yes. Well, often, I at least in the Caribbean, I've been told that liming also is they're literally cutting up limes. Like limes are part of the picture. They're having cocktails. They're drinking. It's liming. You're literally, there's limes. There's like 80 limes in the room.
Actually, my mom is from the Caribbean, so with the Indian blood.
So you can fact check it. Is that true?
I'm gonna ask her, but I have Indian blood from my mother and from the Indian coming.
I know at least in Dominica, liming, there are limes involved. It's liming is a wonderful, I love. It's helpful to have containers, and what I mean by that is. Liming, right? It's like, oh, what's liming, right? It's naming. Really good gatherers are really good namers. The worn out mom's hootenanny, right? Liming. Oh, what's liming? Oh, liming is just hanging out, doing nothing and committed to doing nothing together. In Latin culture, sobremesa, right? You if you go to an Argentinian's home and you go and you eat and then you get up and leave, people would think, where are they going? It's Sunday. Where are they going? Because they realize that actually the real gathering begins after everyone's full and you sit around the table, right? Literally sobre mesa, over the table, around the table, and you just hang. And so much of that is actually protecting, defending that space. And sometimes having mental models for it, sometimes having stories, this comes from this place, and it's not appropriating, it's honoring those traditions, because most cultures have that intelligence within it. So find your version or your versions from the lineages of your communities and modernize them so that people are coming together and building meaningful community.
I was told the story yesterday of a person who said, okay, there are things that everybody can agree on. And he joined together people that usually would disagree on topics, politics or stuff. And so he launched the first topic, and that was like, it didn't work at all. Like at first they were so polarized, and they stand for the, even though what he was defending or proposing was, super obvious, they couldn't agree. And I was wondering, in time of polarization and performance, how can you, transform people with gathering?
Get offline, get in person. And actually, one of my mentors, Hal Saunders, the late Hal Saunders, my lineage as a conflict resolution facilitator is in the lineage of group dialogue, and specifically a process called sustained dialogue, where a group of people come together and commit to continuing to come together across lines of difference over time. And he would always say to us, do not become sustained dialogue salesmen. Don't assume dialogue is the fix for everything. Sometimes people need to talk less. Sometimes when you ask what the need is in the community, it is not dialogue. It is, they need to play a soccer game together. They need to go have a party together. They need to go walk in the river together. They need to go have a blast together. There was a church that reached out to me in the US a lot, and a woman who was volunteering there said to me, the pandemic has been very difficult in the US. The Black Lives Matter movement was very difficult for our church. Both kind of tore us apart internally. We've done a lot of missing of each other, was how she phrased it. We haven't, because of the pandemic, we haven't literally worshiped together. We haven't been in the same congregation. And she said, I don't even know where to begin. No one wants to meet. How do we do dialogue? And she really thought about it. And she was on a text thread. And she said, what if instead of a dialogue, we threw a party? And it's like it was 2 years into the pandemic. Everyone was still kind of nervous. You had to sort of practice putting on jeans again, right? You practice your social skills. And I said, And then they were on this text thread. What if we did it in the parking lot instead of inside the church? Great. What if we had our band play, but not Christian songs, cover songs? Great. And then someone jokingly said, what if we have a dunk tank? And a dunk tank is like, I don't know if you ever have seen this. It's like where you throw a ball. If you ever read Curious George books, the monkey like throws a ball at this button, and then whoever's sitting on the diving board gets dunked and gets like, it's released and you get thrown into the water. So he said, what if we get a dunk tank? And someone else said, dunk the deacon, ? LOL. Long story short, they realized, okay, what is our purpose? She'd read The Art of Gathering. She emailed me. She said, what is our purpose? And she said, I defended the purpose. The purpose right now is to create joy. The purpose is to create spectacle, shared experience. The purpose is to regrow the love. I think we should spend $300 on renting the dunk tank. And they did. And they had this parking lot party, and they basically grew the love. They had the deep intelligence to realize people are worn out. They're exhausted. They don't need to talk about their polarized, defections from liturgy. They need to sing ABBA together.
Yeah. I like that you talk a lot about playfulness because I think as adults, and especially in this optimized world, we have lost playfulness.
Yes. And people love to have fun, but it's kind of like, I don't know, we like don't think it's for us or it's not the time to do it, but actually it's so deeply rejuvenating. And people are and the playfulness can be like the worn out mom's hootenanny. Sorry to keep coming back to it. There was a deep playfulness in it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right. The other thing in the Hal Saunders element is sometimes what people need in polarized situations is not more dialogue. It's a shared experience. Right. The soccer game is like, mix up the teams, go play yard games together, go sing karaoke together, go ask the, matriarch or patriarch of a village that's being torn apart. What were the ways in which you used to gather on a Saturday night? Will you teach us? What if we did a big barn dance?
Yeah.
Right. And so giving people all sorts of tiny ways to actually just spend time together and widen their aperture of what they think of each other and not pretend the group is the same, but complicate the individual.
And actually, when I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh, this could also work for dates, like just the two of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who doesn't want to have fun? Also, you learn so much about a person when they're joking around, right? What's their sense of humor? What's their risk taking? How do you think about, if you're passing a ball, are they a passer or are they really trying to hog the limelight? You learn so much about throwing people into an actual experience together. There's so many different forms of connection. And yes, dialogue and meaningful conversation is a really beautiful and simple one. And sometimes you need to stop talking. You need to actually just go have some fun together.
And I love to hear that because I'm such an intellectual. I'm so much into talking that I totally need this to go and play.
Like a few years ago for my birthday, I try, every year my birthday comes around just like everyone else in the world. And a few years ago I thought, okay, what's the need in my life? Right? What can I almost use my birthday as an excuse for? And I'd heard a lot about pickleball. And it was growing quickly in the US, and I really wanted to try this sport called pickleball. And so and none of my friends had tried it either. And so I used the excuse of my birthday, and I invited, it was 14 people to a pickleball tournament. None of them had played before. They were all, were like kind of curious, kind of worried. We had someone on the court first teach us, and then we had a pickleball tournament. And my husband created posters. He created teams. And then at some point in the right at the beginning, another friend of mine came in and said, okay, not only if you're going to have teams, we all need to have each pair needs to have a chant, right? She was also a great guest. So if all of this feels overwhelming, start by being a great guest. She brought the spirit. So by the end of it, everyone had their own cheers and chanting. And these are, quote unquote, serious professionals having the time of their lives.
That's amazing. That's so beautiful.
It can be kickball in the park, right? It can and how did you play as a child? Invite people to do that. I really love the idea. And I think it's changed everything. The dynamic between and we are social animals. So it's changed completely the connection between people. So I really love that. Thank you so much, Priya, for sharing. The podcast name is wrong. So I'm going to ask you, what do you want to open or slam the door to? Or maybe you want to do both. I want to open the door to people creating rituals anew. And I want to close the door on the idea that we're so modern, we no longer need to mark transitions.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Thank you so much, Priya.
Thank you so much for having me.
Loved it. Merci d'avoir écouté Vlan. Si vous avez aimé l'émission, vous pouvez le dire avec des étoiles, 5 de préférence sur iTunes, et le partager avec vos amis ou vos collègues. Je suis Grégory Pouy. Vous pouvez me retrouver sur Twitter et LinkedIn sous le pseudo Greg from Paris. N'hésitez pas à me remonter vos remarques, vos questions, mais aussi les invités que vous aimeriez entendre.